What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one I'm going to discuss Wildcard 35. I do have my chip active. I'm going to go through my first draft, talk through which players are pretty much locked in at this stage and which ones I'm not sure about and who I might be looking to swap to instead. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. Let's get into it. Alright, let's start with the defensive players. Now it's worth noting that I am wildcarding this week. My chip's already active. And I'm also bench boosted in Gameweek 37, so my draft might look a little bit different to someone who is also wildcarding this week, but that has already used their bench boost. The main difference is, from what I could see when I looked at it briefly, is the number of Arsenal players. I think for someone bench boosted in 37, you might go for minimal Arsenal. I've got 1 in this squad, whereas if you're not bench boosting, I'd probably have 3. There might be some other subtle differences, but that seems to be the main one. So just bear that in mind when you're listening to me talk about this draft. The goalkeeper combination, I've gone for Vicario and Ederson. Nothing is locked in yet, right? I can make different decisions by the time we get to Saturday's deadline. There might be injuries and suspensions based on what happens in the rest of the Game Week 34 matches. But I'm fairly sure that Vicario will make the final draft, mostly because Udogie's now out for the season and Pedro Porro is a doubt for the Arsenal game. Now, Ange Postecoglou might give us an update and tell us he's fine. But as it stands, neither of those two players are options. I don't really like any of the other Spurs defenders. And because they've got 2 double game weeks, I want at least 2 Spurs players, possibly even 3. Completely understand that the doubles aren't great, especially this week. Arsenal at home, Chelsea away. And in the Game Week 37 double, they've also got to play Man City. But I just don't think I can wildcard into a bench boost when a team's got 2 double game weeks and just ignore them. So Vicario almost becomes the default pick because of the defenders that are on offer. There's no way I'm going to go triple Spurs attack or anything like that. So I think Vicario will make it. With Ederson, that's really a minutes thing. I think while the league title race is still on, he will play every single minute. Ortega won't come in. And given that Arsenal and Liverpool have just won this weekend, I'm hoping that that race will go right down to the line. It's very unlikely that we get to Game Week 37 and it's over. So Ederson should play. And I quite like the Man City defence, despite the fact I always ignore their defenders. But that's mostly because of rotation and stuff like that. Like Ruben Dias, Vardiol, they could be really good options. But I just don't want that headache of having to think about it. So Ederson covers that Man City defence without having to pick a defender. And also, with Ederson, as long as I can get through Game Week 37 with him, that should be enough. Because in Game Week 38, Man City got West Ham at home. If the league is over and Ortega's playing, fair enough. I'm just going to play Vicario against Sheffield United away anyway. Like, Spurs may still have European places to play for and stuff like that. And also, their backup keeper in Forster is out for the season. So Vicario should play every game. And he's got a good fixture last day of the season. Like, they might concede because Spurs always concede. But I quite like him as a pick. So I think Vicario will stay. And I think Ederson will probably stay as well. Because it's all about combinations then. So I've got Gusto in defence, because I think he's one of the most attacking Chelsea defenders. I could go for Petrovic instead of Ederson, but then I'm getting rid of Gusto for a Man City defender, and I just prefer this way around as it stands. With Gusto in isolation, I'm not completely convinced he plays all 6 games that Chelsea have left, even if they're going for European places and stuff like that. He just seems a bit fragile to me. Even at the last game he played against Man City in the FA Cup, he got a bit of a knock, carried on playing, then came off later on. Apparently it was just a precaution, but there's always something like that. But he's so much more attacking than any of the other options. I think he has to be in. Plus he's quite cheap as well. Money's quite tight. In the draft that I'm showing you now, I've only got 0.4 million in the bank. So I think Gusto will make the cut. And then the rest of the defenders, I've got Cher and Dalot playing this week. And then I've got Dan Burn and Gabriel on the bench. Now, if I include an Arsenal defender, I'm going to be bench boosting them in Game Week 37 with Man United away, which isn't necessarily ideal. But the idea of having them is because of the fixtures outside of that. So I can bench them in 35, no issue. I've got other defenders with better fixtures. I'd then play Gabriel against Bournemouth at home in 36. Bench boost him in 37. Maybe he gets a clean sheet or a goal against Man United. And then I've got him for, I think it's Everton at home last day of the season. And again, if the league is still on, he will play that game and it's not a bad fixture. And maybe at that point, Everton won't have much to play for. And hopefully, it's a little bit of an easier game, even though it never really works out like that. There are maybe scenarios where I keep double Arsenal defence, but I'm not sure I want to bench boost with 2 Arsenal defenders away to Man United. So I'll probably just go with 1 And Gabriel's the best value one for me. Like if I was buying new, I might go for Ben White as a differential, but he's 6 million. I got Gabriel cheap back in game week 10, and I've had him ever since. I've built up value in him, so he's probably the one that I will keep. With Share, I think I want a Newcastle defender. Sheffield United at home this week, Burnley away, double game week in 37. And while Trippier is a doubt, Share is the most attacking defender in that team, and he's absolutely nailed. You do pay a bit of a premium for that, but I think it's worth it. If Trippier plays or is on the bench in game week 34 for their match against Palace away, I may go for him and just find the money from somewhere. Because Trippier, back a few weeks ago, he was the one differential that I felt wildcarders in 35 had over other people. And him having a knock has just been a bit frustrating. So if there's any signs that he might play by game week 37, I may go for him because I could always bench him this week. But as it stands, I've got Share and Dan Burn, which means I don't have two Newcastle attackers, which I'll come on to in a minute. Dan Burn's just a nice, cheap option that has a double in 37, basically. And then I've got Dalot. Now, I could go for Harry Maguire, who's a little bit cheaper. I think Dallow's more attacking, and he's playing 90 minutes every single game. No matter who comes back in, I expect him to finish the matches for Man United. And yes, they're through to the FA Cup final now, but Ten Hag never rotates, and there's 6 days between game week 38 and the FA Cup final, and I might not even have to play Dalot that final week anyway. So he's basically in for Burnley at home this week, and then the double in 37. Now, you could sit there and say Dallow's not a great pick, and I'd probably agree with you, but then I'd ask which other double game week defender should I get in instead? There probably isn't many better, and the other option would be just getting another Arsenal defender, and maybe that works out better overall, but I think at some point I've got to attack the double game weeks. Like the last couple of game weeks haven't gone great for me, and wildcarding into a double in 35 and then a bigger one in 37, it just doesn't feel right to go with a bunch of single game week players. And defences like Man United will not be popular because they cannot stop conceding. I think it's perfectly reasonable if you don't want one, but it just makes me want to go for one even more. Again, it's just a combination thing, right? If Porro was fit, I could go for Onana and Porro instead of Dalot and Vicario. That's definitely an option. I quite like Onana as a pick, but as it stands with all the information we've got, that's the backline I'm going for. And don't get me wrong, as someone that's had double Arsenal defence since game week 12, it doesn't feel great not having any of them in the team this week. But with the fixtures that Share, Dalot and Gusto have got, I don't think it looks that bad. So these are the 5 picks that I've made in midfield. I've got a double up on the Spurs attack with Son and Maddison, which I know people will hate, and I'll talk about that in a minute, why I've gone for that combination. I've got Bruno Fernandes, Cole Palmer, who I don't think I need to go into too much detail about. I got him at 4.9 million. He cannot stop scoring FPL points. It's a double game week this week. There's another one in 37. He's an absolute must, so we'll just leave it at that. And then I've got Phil Foden currently on the bench. Now, don't get too hung up on the fact that I'm playing Fernandes and benching Foden. Obviously, when it comes down to it, I could switch that around. But either way, as it stands, both players are going to be in the squad. The thing I like about Man City now is they're out of the Champions League. So the only thing they have to concern themselves about for the foreseeable future is the Premier League, because the FA Cup final, which is the other competition they're still in, is 6 days after game week 38. So there shouldn't be too many issues with the rotation. Does it mean Foden's going to play every single match they have left? No, I'm sure he'll get rotated at some point. But I think after game week 35, there's a week between games. Obviously, for the double itself in 37, there's a midweek. But overall, the gaps get a little bit better. And we know Foden is part of the first 11. He's really good value as well. I just don't have the money to go up to a De Bruyne. And to be honest with you, I just don't know if De Bruyne is even a better option than Foden anyway. He might be a better differential, but Foden just is an all-round solid pick. So I quite like him. I think with Bruno, that is mostly just a minutes pick. You know he's going to start every single game. Ten Hag will not rotate. Like I said with Dalot, even in game week 38, because of that gap to the FA Cup final, Bruno Fernandes will start that match. He's on penalties as well. I still like Garnacho as a cheap option, but his minutes do seem to be getting a little bit less at the moment. Obviously, injuries might impact that more, where he gets even more game time. And I still think he's a really good cheap option. But as it stands with the draft that I've made, I don't need the money that you save by going Garnacho. And I just think Bruno Fernandes is probably the better pick until the end of the season, you know, in isolation, just him versus Garnacho. Obviously, if it comes down to it and I need to put a bit more money in other positions, like Trippier, for example, and Porro, Fernandes might go, but I quite like him as an option, and he's a huge differential as well. Some people will look at him, but honestly, the way that Man United are playing right now, I think most people will avoid. And again, in a lot of cases, that makes sense. But for me, it's just the fixtures. I'll play him against Burnley. I'll bench him against Palace next week in 36. And then you've got him ready for the double game where I'm bench boosting. So I think, look, Fernandes isn't locked in by any stretch, but he's quite close to being locked in. I could go for Anthony Gordon instead of Fernandes and just drop down Burn to someone else. And look, I think part of the worry with Gordon is Sheffield United at home this week. He could score enough points this week to make going without him for the rest of the season look extremely stupid. But if it's a fight between Fernandes and Gordon for the rest of the season, I'm just about going to back Fernandes. And he's actually done all right recently. Like, he's not been amazing, but I kind of regret selling him when I did. Let me just find him here. So obviously they haven't played Sheffield United yet in Gameweek 34, but it was 2 goals against Bournemouth. He scored against Liverpool the week before. Chelsea scored as well. Blanked against Brentford. Got a goal against Everton the game before that. An assist against City. An assist against Fulham. And Man United haven't performed that well, but Fernandes has still found a way to be fairly consistent. And one of the reasons that happens is because he's always on the pitch, right to the end of the game. And that is kind of useful for FPL. Also, just ignore my team on screen right now because I've just set the wildcard up for price changes. Nothing more than that. I'm too scared to sell the likes of Saka and Salah until I absolutely have to, basically. So just ignore that. On the double up with Spurs, look, some people are going to go into Game Week 35 without any Spurs players. And I don't even want to say they're going to get away with it because I think it's more than viable to do because of the fixtures, because of the way that I don't think Spurs have been bad or anything like that. But I just think their FPL picks are not great right now. Defensively, they can't keep a clean sheet. But there is no way I am going to wildcard, like I've already said, into a double for Spurs this week and 1 in 37 and ignore them, right? Someone like Son can get goals in these more difficult games. He's got Burnley at home in 37 as well. I just can't go without them. One of the issues is Game Week 36 is Liverpool away, so I'm going to have to play one of Son or Maddison if I go with this draft. But is Son against Liverpool away that bad? I'm not convinced it is. So I'm kind of okay with it. Son is pretty much a lock for me, despite his performances recently and despite the lack of returns, because I know he's always going to play, whether it's number 9 or on the left, and he's on penalties, and his minutes are decent. I know in the last game, he came off quite early against Newcastle, which was not ideal, but it just wasn't working in that game, and I kind of understand it. I don't think that's going to be a sign of things to come in the future. Brennan Johnson's someone that people really like. It's a bit like Havertz, I guess. I think right now, Brennan Johnson is clearly first choice for Spurs. But am I confident enough that that will always be the case, that he's always in that 11? Like, Havertz started again for Arsenal this weekend. I'm sure he'll start again against Chelsea. And we probably should be calling him as nailed as Odegaard and Saka. But there's still that element of doubt. And that's the same with Brennan Johnson. Like, if Kulusevski started a game, I wouldn't be that surprised. So I don't think I can go with him. Whereas at least with Maddison, I know he's going to start. And recently, his minutes have been going up. I wonder if he had a bit of a knock at one point. I've spoken about this before. But over the last 5 game weeks, he's gone 65, 67, 69, 75, 80. He's starting to climb back up in the amount of game time he's getting. Performance is not great and no returns, but at least I know he's going to start. The one play... There is a chance that I switch Maddison out for Gordon. I think there's quite a good chance that happens. Because Anthony Gordon right now, given the discussions going around with Wildcard 35 and just what non-wildcarders teams look like, Anthony Gordon's probably the player that worries me the most. Even more so in some ways than Saka and Salah. I can be comfortable selling them because I have to, because of the amount of money I need and the lack of spaces and the fact they don't have any more doubles. But Gordon does have a double in 37 and he does have good fixture this week in Sheffield United. And the other thing to mention with Newcastle is the games in 37 are Brighton at home and Man United away. They're pretty good attacking fixtures, and they've got Burnley away in 36. And Brentford away 38 is not bad either. So there is a good chance I swap Maddison to Gordon, but then I've only got 2 Spurs players. And if I want 3, I've then got to get a defender in. So it's like Maddison and Dan Burn, or Anthony Gordon and a Spurs defender. Now, if Porro is fit, I'll almost certainly go Porro and Gordon. But if he's not, getting that Spurs defender in just doesn't feel great. And neither does going with just 2 Spurs players. So that's the kind of issue I'm dealing with the way I want to set my squad up. I know what the comments are going to be. Just go with 2 Spurs players and get Anthony Gordon and change Davern, and that's probably fair given the way the Spurs picks have been going and the fixtures they've got. But I don't know. There's something about Maddison that just if he could just start performing like he did at the start of the season, he's suddenly a huge differential. Can he outscore Anthony Gordon this week with 2 games? It's possible. It's possible. Like, Spurs will score against Arsenal. I'm almost certain of it. And then Chelsea is not necessarily a super difficult game, although it is away from home. But I don't know. I just feel like if I go for Maddison and Gordon smashes it, like, there's no hindsight there. Gordon is just a great pick, right? And I don't know if I want to go up against that kind of ownership. I don't mind going against high-owned players if I'm fully convinced it's the right choice. But I'm not here. I'm just finding it difficult to pick a second Spurs defender. Even if Porro was fit, do I really want double Spurs defence against Arsenal and Chelsea? I don't know if I do. So that's out of all these players you're looking at on screen right now, I think Maddison and Dan Burn and possibly Dallo are the ones I'm least sure about. Everyone else I think is looking pretty good. And then up front, I've got Haaland, who's currently yellow flagged. We don't even know if he's going to play against Brighton in game week 34 yet. And if he is a doubt for game week 35, there's a big decision to be made. But if he's fit, then it's quite an easier one, I think. He's going to be in the team. The fixtures for City are pretty good. They've got a double in 37. I don't want to sell Haaland, despite what his recent FPL returns have been like. If he is out for 35, and then maybe there's a doubt about 36 as well, it's actually quite an interesting dilemma, because my first thought would be to go for Alvarez, but I think I would have to leave enough money in the bank to go back to Haaland. I don't want to get into a position where I'm stuck with Alvarez and then I keep him because I think he's going to start and then he doesn't. I think I'd have to keep the money in the bank for Haaland. Obviously, if he's ruled out for the rest of the season, it's an easy decision, but I don't think that's going to be the case. But if there's any chance he starts 35, I think I'm just going to go with him. I could even bench him for Foden if I wanted to and play 3-5-2 and just have him for later on. Basically, I don't think selling Haaland to a cheaper forward really enables a huge amount for the rest of the squad, so I'm quite happy to have him. Nicholas Jackson makes up my third Chelsea player, obviously double this week, double in 37, and I don't think there's really anyone better from Chelsea themselves. Like, none of the other attackers like Madueke, Mudryk, Sterling, etc. are options, and I don't really want to go for double defence. I could go for Gusto and Petrovic, I guess, or Gusto and Dizazi, but I think Nicholas Jackson's a nice differential. A lot of people obviously are going to be looking at just holding on to Watkins or bringing him in instead. He's been incredible this season, ridiculous amount of goals and assists, especially for someone without penalties. But I feel like that's a player that I'm willing to take on. I'm willing to go for the extra fixtures from Jackson over someone like Watkins. Will it definitely work out? No, I probably wouldn't put a huge amount of money on it. But like I said, it's someone that I'm basically willing to go for that differential and continue to back against Watkins. The thing about Ollie Watkins as well is his ownership went down quite a lot when they had Man City away and Arsenal away and when he was injured. And I don't think a huge amount of people are going to bring him back in anyway. And if they do, if people are using transfers to get Watkins back in, I kind of like that. I kind of like being able to take that on. So Nicholas Jackson's quite high up in terms of being nailed in the team. The one thing to say, and I'm just going to double check this, is Chelsea haven't yet played their 32nd game. So if we just come to the Premier League table, they've only played 31. If Nicholas Jackson gets a yellow card against Arsenal in game week 34, he'll be suspended for 2 matches and miss both games in 35. At that point, I probably wouldn't keep hold of him. Again, if Haaland was fine, I could just bench Jackson for 35 and play Foden instead and have him ready for 37. But I feel like I'd go for someone else instead. The problem is the double game week options then get narrowed down a bit. It's probably Højlund or João Pedro. João Pedro's a nice cheap option. Højlund, it's not quite clicking for him at the moment. But again, as a big differential, I'd be kind of tempted by that. All I know is, even if Jackson gets suspended, I don't see myself going for Ollie Watkins, despite how good he's been. But all eyes on that Arsenal game to see if Jackson does get suspended. And then Isak, Sheffield United at home, I think he's just an absolute lock for pretty much anyone that's wildcarding this week. He's too good to turn down. I'm sure he's going to score again in 34 and make me regret not having him already. Sheffield United at home, great. Then it's Burnley away, double in 37. There's just no need to overthink this one. I know that Callum Wilson has been pictured in training, and he probably will take some minutes off Isak. But when they've got a week between games, I'm sure Isak will continue to start. He's first choice number 9 for Newcastle. There's no reason to bring Wilson in ahead. Obviously, they're still trying to climb up the table as well. And I just don't see them playing together, right? You've got Barnes, Isak, Gordon. It's a great front three. You just don't need to put Wilson in there. I'm sure Eddie Howe will use Wilson as an excuse to get Isak off earlier in games to make sure he can continue to be fit for the rest of the season. But I don't see Wilson starting ahead of him. Maybe in game week 37, but I think it's worth taking that risk because it's not like Newcastle have only got the double. They've also got great fixtures beforehand. So you probably don't need convincing, right? Isak's a great option. But for anyone that's worried about Wilson, I wouldn't be in particular. Like I saw someone the other day say, well, Wilson's going to want to play because of the Euros. But it doesn't work like that, right? Newcastle have the Premier League to worry about, their position in that league. And Isak is their best option in that number 9 position. So Wilson just isn't going to get to play. That's unfortunate. Plus, there's no chance Wilson makes the Euros squad anyway. I'm sure he will not think like that. There's no way he gets into that team, right? They're not going to take more than 2 or 3 forwards, and I don't think Wilson's part of that based on what's happened this season. But that's a whole different conversation, maybe for a different channel like Let's Talk Football. Anyway, that is the draft as it stands. There might be a few pieces that move around, but I think Vicario, Share without Trippier getting fit, Gusto, Son, Fernandes, Palmer, Haaland, Jackson, Isak, probably Gabriel, Foden, and maybe even Edison are all almost to the point where I'm kind of locking them in already. If you enjoyed that video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button, rate 5 stars if you listen on podcast. I'll be back tomorrow with another video.